Hi, I'm George Norrie, and welcome to our Coast to Coast AM YouTube channel. Have fun, tell your friends, and share us with everyone. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TicTac, and Coast to Coast AM's mobile app. And always remember to log on to our website at coasttocoastam.com for daily articles, the best paranormal information, and all you need to know about your favorite guests. And now you can become a Coast Insider directly through the Coast mobile app. We welcome our international listeners and even offer a free 2-week trial. So don't delay. Become an insider today.
Greetings, Mr. and Mrs. Middle America and all the ships at sea. This is Ian Punnett. To the hostile invading alien armies hovering silently behind their cloaking devices, eat the Canadians first, and it's beginning to turn into less of a joke week by week. I mean, not that anyone's going to come down and eat us anytime soon, but boy, the engagement level is just way high. If you were watching any of the congressional hearings, you're going to enjoy hearing Wilbur Allen talk about it tonight on Coast to Coast AM. We're going to unpack some of what you've heard and have him give his interpretation of what you haven't heard. There were a few moments where one of the three guests that spoke in front of a joint congressional committee had been forced to say, I can't talk about that with you in front of an open mic or camera. We have to get a skiff, and no skiffs were made available. You know, those are essentially the cone of silence, except cone of silence never worked, if you remember, in Get Smart. And they would lower the cone of silence, and Maxwell Smart and the chief would end up like crawling underneath the desk and all that. But skiffs work. And the concept behind this skiff, the idea that there could be things that could still be said, that need to be said, that Congress people need to hear, but we still can't know about it, is bothersome. But it just goes to show you we're still on the edge of what everything the government knows, everything the Pentagon knows. We can't use Freedom of Information Act with Congress. We can't use it with the Pentagon. We can try if something has gone through the executive branch, but remember that's what we're given with FOIA. Is the information of anything through the executive branch of government. So some of the most tantalizing facts about what were discussed this week are still out of reach. We have, if you will, hints and clues, breadcrumbs, if we're going to use the iRobot metaphor, that will take us to the truth, and Wilbur Allen will help us sort it out, and then we'll do open lines for the rest of the night on Coast to Coast. But it was just an amazing week of testimony, and I hope you had a chance to hear it. If you haven't, you can click onto that at coasttocoastam.com, and you can go back and you can watch the entire presentation unedited, such as it was, on the website. While you're there, of course, there's other fun things to do and other great stories to look at in the carousel, in the news carousel of Coast to Coast. But it's a great place to get caught up on this Pentagon investigation, that is to say, Congress investigating the Pentagon, not the other way around. Wilbur Allen, Ph.D., welcome back to Coast AM. I know that you have a long history with the show. I found data points about you, but I don't really find a narrative about you that's sort of explains your life in the story arc that you've traveled. Could you tell us, like in your own words, if you give us a little escalator speech on your career for people to track you better?
I can definitely do that, Ian. Thank you for having me. I, for my PhD, created extreme spatial scan technology and conducted a 5-year study of space in various locations of the United States. And in doing so, I scanned consistently, constantly for hours at night, trying to detect and document spatial anomalies, which I did. So if those of you are interested in looking at the research in which I conducted for the last 5 years, please go to Dr. Wilbur Allen YouTube, which is my YouTube channel, Dr. Wilbur Allen YouTube, or go to my website, UFODC, David Charlie, UFODC.com.
Okay. We've got the latter link up at coasttocoastam.com, so that'll make it easier for them there. Went to Howard University, do I understand?
I did my all of my undergraduate, master's, and PhD at Howard University. Yes, I did.
Excellent. And then, but several times along the way, you've also touched government service. Doesn't seem like, I mean,
I was
did
an
cool stuff,
engineer on Air Force One for Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush.
Okay. And those are good enough bona fides for most people, but that's just kind of where it begins with Wilbur Allen. So let's go over what happened this week. In front of Congress, in front of the whole world, there were congressional hearings about these recent Pentagon-released videotapes. I believe the number they gave was 171. That's a lot of sightings, a lot of encounters that continue to go unexplained and fall into the category of unexplained aerial phenomenon, or what we used to call UFOs.
UFOs, exactly.
Yeah. But, UFOs, I can understand why there's been a shift away from the term UFO, because for a lot of people that comes with fairly loaded language. I mean, as an acrostic, UFO came to mean something which it was not originally intended to make, because UFO was originally a military designation, wasn't it?
Well, it was indeed a military designation. It stood for unidentified flying objects, but now we're in the UAP category, which was brought about precisely because of the encounters by the USS Nimitz in 2004.
Right. But I mean, I more to the point, the UFO language, calling something UFO or calling somebody UFO enthusiast or whatever, came with a sort of a pejorative connotation. And so by moving it off of that, I think they've been trying to broaden it so that somebody could say, oh, no, I mean, as ridiculous as we both know this is, they say, oh, I believe in UAPs. I'm not a UFO guy. And it's like, okay, well, whatever you think that means works for me. But that is so often is what happens in the evolution of language. Something becomes so burdened with interpretation and misuse that you kind of have to ditch it after a while and start from something else.
Well, that's the reason why I created spatial scan technology, and it was uniform throughout the locations in which I set up my technology, meaning the equipment was set up and operated exactly the same in each of the environments. It generated for me consistent image files, and the consistency in the image files I generated are based on the stars that are documented in the file. And in each file that is documented, all the stars flow in the same direction. So I was able to create a study in which the sample base was uniform and consistent throughout the entire operation.
Okay. So here you have, though, three very reputable people speaking to Congress, changing at least the way a lot of people are willing to think about UFOs. Even if they call them UFO whistleblowers, they were speaking at a UAP joint congressional hearing.
Yes.
And it was interesting to see the number of Congress people who 10 years ago this would have been a career ender.
They would have been chuckling, laughing their backs off, because they never took the UFO incident seriously, because there wasn't any actual physical evidence. And what the government provided was 680p FLIR, and the technology that I created was 4K infrared. So there's a substantial difference in the documentation of materials. What made my materials a little bit better, it was the fact that it documented them in 470 nanometers infrared, which is a considered full-color infrared, and I was able to document the energy fields associated to each of the objects.
And no one party that I know of, politically speaking, has been particularly receptive to the conversation about UAPs. I mean, Ronald Reagan came out and said something about what he had seen and was kind of pilloried for it. Even in his own party, they kind of, I mean, he was very popular. So it was like, well, that's, kind of, that's what the Gipper said.
Star Wars Initiative. He developed the Star Wars Initiative, which was a satellite designed for that application. It was designed to shoot down UFOs from space. Right.
But even that in itself became kind of a joke. Now nobody's laughing. I mean, the fact that the Pentagon has volunteered these videos and said, we don't know what they are. We get into the TicTac video. We have 3 different people who spoke about UFOs, including going up the chain within the military, whatever their branch was, and complaining or asking for help on understanding what their reports had experienced. There was no chuckling anymore. There seemed to be a kind of a coalition of the grateful, and the people that were there got along like the way Congress people should get along, of different parts. Yeah, they treated it very professionally, and there was no snickering, even though some of these subjects are still somewhat fantastic for the average American.
Well, here's the problem. The average American now has advanced cell phone technology, and on each of these cell phones is a camera which does selfies. It also does what's around them in terms of standard cinema perspective of space, if that may be the case, or daytime, which may be the case, of anything that they point their phone at. So now there's this evidence that comes from a multitude of people, which all have cell phones, documenting these spatial anomalies in which they no longer can dispute.
But I think what's really indisputable is, and Wilbur Allen, you're the expert, but when somebody's shooting something from the ground up, right, and they're using cell phone technology, invariably it's going to be a little blurry. It's going to you could have all sorts of different arguments about what it actually was. When the Pentagon released this is cockpit video,
that's
right?
680p FLIR, by the way. It's 680p FLIR. So we now have this physical documentation from the United States government from military aircraft. And what's interesting, in most cases, those videos that were filmed by these aircraft, the pilots more than likely did not see the anomalies because those anomalies existed in extreme invisibility, and only FLIR could possibly detect and pick those objects up.
Okay. This all and there's still a ways to go then on what we see, and it's still dismissible because it seems too silhouetted. It seems too much like Pong, if you looked at it on a screen. Yes. For some people yet to take it seriously, but that's coming. And so let's start with, if you don't mind, Air Force Officer David Grutch. He's gotten a lot of the oxygen on this story because he talks about non-human biologics that were taken from crashed crafts, and that they were, although he intoned that they were killed, he didn't come out and say they were murdered. Not that I caught, but he did say that they were taken alive from some of these crashes, and he would not identify where. So let's start with the where. Where would the Air Force, where would any of the departments in the Pentagon, do you think they would take the crafts or the occupants of interplanetary crafts?
More than likely, I would believe that the occupants and the craft themselves were taken to the Langley Research Center.
Not
and then analysis
not to Area 51.
It is a very possibility. They also took them to Area 51. My experience in Area 51 is that Area 51 is indeed an extraterrestrial base. What I saw in Area 51 were ET spacecraft, and what I documented in Area 51 were ET spacecraft.
Okay. Talk to me about documenting ET spacecraft.
I created a consistent technology in which I would document space. I used a camera technology which had 4 million ISO sensitivity. And with that level of sensitivity, it became easy to scan space in a real-time application. And that's exactly what I did. I scanned space in real time and was able to document these objects in infrared, in space, in real time.
And you were able, though, then, in that documentation, you believe then that they were taken to or they were engaged with Area 51?
From my data, I would think that whatever I documented in Area 51 could have indeed have been back-engineered extraterrestrial technology, without a doubt.
All right. Talk to me about Langley and why you think that a non-human biologics would be taken to Langley.
It is the hub of the scientific investigation network for the United States military, and Langley is specifically a restricted airfield, a restricted base, in which advanced experimentation and advanced technology is being developed for the United States military.
And in this, it's really that military advantage which you think leads to the ongoing secrecy about it.
Exactly, the secrecy associated to it, because the technology they created had to be back-engineered from an original source, and the original source in these cases would be extraterrestrial technology.
Okay. And then have we so far implemented this these retro-engineered
of course.
craft?
If you look at what happened in Roswell, for example, in Roswell, we were able to extract optic fiber and laser technology from the spacecraft that was downed in Roswell in the 1940s. So with that in mind, those particular technologies, optic fiber, laser technology, have been implemented into society as modes of communications in the bulk majority of telecommunication systems that are established on Earth.
Okay. So going back to Roswell then to tie that in together, but what today would be the advantage we would have? Presumably, the United States is not the only government that has gotten a hold of this kind of retro technology.
We have essentially become the Borg, if you're familiar with the Borg in Star Trek. Yeah. We assimilated most of everything that was presented to us, and what I'm talking about in terms of presentation, extraterrestrial spacecraft. If they did indeed crash, we got them, we took them apart, and we studied them, and we tried to back-engineer the systems associated to their propulsion systems, to their communication systems, to their cloaking systems.
Have you ever personally experienced career setbacks or the kind of prejudice personally that we know that has existed for other people who have come forward and tried to have a sober conversation about UFOs?
I achieved the position of Air Force One engineer for Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. And, H.W. Bush, before becoming president, was head of the Central Intelligence Agency. So for me, logically, and in those positions that I held for the duration of the time that I did engineer Air Force One, I maintained silence. I did not talk about my experiences as a child in which extraterrestrials visited me. Both of my parents were SAC, which is Strategic Air Command, which is the United States Air Force, and they both dealt with nuclear weapons. And in the cases that I experienced, the same biological entity would appear in my room, Star Trek style. It would beam in and just stand there and look at me. And it was absolutely abstract to me, especially as a child who's never experienced extraterrestrials, to see this extraterrestrial entity manifest into my room.
But that doesn't necessarily answer the question. So you stayed silent. What happened when you started to speak out? Did you ever experience?
I didn't start speaking out until well after my tenure on board Air Force One, because I didn't want to compromise my position, so I maintained silence. But in speaking out, I never experienced any malice or prejudice associated to the research data that I presented to the public.
Okay, but then you'll have to agree. There have been plenty of people who are PhDs who are teaching in mainstream universities who would have had a different experience.
Absolutely, but then you have to consider the technology that I created was unlike anything anyone on this planet had utilized. And for the purpose of application, I took existing technology and augmented it for the application of scanning space.
David Fravor, a former Navy commander, spoke in front of Congress this week. He said that he and some other military pilots spotted the famous TicTac.
Yes,
TicTac.
Which is
TicTac.
A biological organism, by the way.
Right. Okay, so the very same TicTac he saw, that was not a craft, that was an organism.
Yes. My data clearly indicates I've got 3,000 samples of the TicTac, that it is specifically an organism. What's interesting, of the 3,000 samples, I can only match one. And the one that I matched was a high-energy TicTac, which I would suggest to the United States military not to engage.
Because?
It is high energy, and it would definitely devastate the planet.
Okay. So you don't think that there was a non-human biologic inside of the TicTac?
I could not ascertain that. What I could ascertain was the fact that whatever these objects were, they had some form of identity. Each TicTac was uniform in terms of its shape, but different in overall applications. When you start to do a comparative analysis, it made it impossible for me to match these objects.
The performance is pretty consistent in these TicTac videos.
Oh, absolutely. They have warp capability. They left our fastest jets, the F-18s, standing in the dust.
And that's what David Fravor was saying, and others were agreeing, that it went from Mach 0 to Mach 1 in like 1 second.
Blink of the eye. If you blinked your eye, you missed it. You didn't see it.
Right.
So,
A, is it possible that this was some sort of drone? And B, what do you think the purpose of this is, if you had to extrapolate the data?
I believe that the anomalies that I documented were organisms, not drones. There was some kind of biological entity in each of the files, which is interesting.
Let me challenge you before we go forward. I don't know that we're just. I say drone, and you say, "Oh no, that's biological." I still think that that could just be a whole new category of drone. Right, that if we can get if a drone is something that is in our service, like a drone bee or something like that, that it doesn't, if it doesn't have a mind of its own, that it follows the orders that it is given for surveillance or for some other function, it's still a drone. It may end up being its own category of drone, but we've already flirted with that on this planet, right? We've already used dolphins as drones. We've already, right? I mean, we've already done a lot of different things as drones.
We did, in fact, use dolphins as drones. But what was interesting is these objects, the TicTacs, were initially documented and encountered by the International Space Station in space as they came in from outer space and entered into our atmosphere.
Okay.
So we have documentation of that.
So
NASA has documentation of that.
What do you think the purpose is?
Unknown, because each of the objects was, as I mentioned, was very unique and very specific. And whatever the objects were, they were not terrestrial. The radio show.
Okay, but wait. But not terrestrial, again, comes down to if we had to have a purpose, right? If we had to explain in some sort of broader sense what a purpose is, are we being surveilled? Is this do you suspect that this is some sort of, advanced search party that's going out to determine what the defenses are? And how is it possible that these UAPs that have encountered human beings have done so in such a non-combative manner, where it was just kind of like, hey, I'm going to go here, chase me, kind of almost sort of a fun and games or cat and mouse kind of context?
They were not hostile wherever they are. And what was interesting is it appeared in consistency, meaning I documented, as mentioned, 3,000 files, and in the 3,000 files, there is a uniform consistency in terms of trajectories. The objects were all flowing in the same direction, and they all appeared to have something in terms of a mission in which they were accomplishing.
Okay. Now, that would be for the TicTac videos. What's the next step up? What's the next class up, if you will?
The tubular spacecraft.
Okay, that you think those would have the non-human biologics in it?
The tubular spacecraft and the spacecraft that looked like needles. There were objects that were documented by NASA Grumman during Operation Echo 8/12/1960, and the documentation in which NASA Grumman documented is 100% consistent with the objects that I document in space currently.
Okay, and he thought of what that would be? Again, just further surveillance.
Unknown. Whatever they are, they would warp by at warp velocity, and my cameras were capable of detecting them clearly.
Okay. Why would there be formations? What would be the purpose based on your...
Unknown. It was rather interesting that I was documenting these objects. How and why I was able to do that was based on the technology that I created. But in terms of their overall mission and what they're doing here, I could not answer that question.
Okay. Because there's a lot of people who sort of dismiss this still on the basis that I encountered some of them at Deacon Punnett, my Twitter handle, that there are some people that kind of go to the videos and they say, well, obviously they're not advanced technology, or they wouldn't have been discovered, or that they wouldn't have been brought down in a crash landing, that just would undermine any sort of claim that these were interdimensional, or that these were of some sort of extraordinary origin. Because how could you travel, millions of miles to come here and land on Earth and then blow it as soon as you came through the Earth's atmosphere?
I believe most of the crafts that crashed were intentionally ditched, and that technology was specifically ditched to give us the upper edge in technological advances.
You think they're playing favorites on Earth?
I believe they're playing favorites on Earth, yes.
And you believe that we are the beneficiary of that favoritism?
We are the board. We assimilated that technology.
Okay. Again, we're talking with Wilbur Allen about the UAP congressional testimony. So we had three different people that spoke to Congress, all of whom had some unique knowledge. The one who had some of the most interesting stories is the first to say, I've never actually seen one, and that's David Grutch. Did you watch the hearings?
I did not watch the hearings. I was too busy preparing myself for this show. But what is interesting, though, the military is coming forth with some data. They're withholding a bulk majority of the information in which they've gathered. There are objects, as I mentioned, in our atmosphere that exist in invisibility. So if they're invisible, we can't see them. And they could come at any time and land, and they would be directly in front of us, and we wouldn't know a thing because we can't see in that level of light.
Okay, but then how do you know they exist?
My data is rather specific, and it did indeed document them.
Okay, so we can document some sort of displacement. We can document what can your data do that the naked eye?
I'm not sure what the military FLIR can do. Military FLIR, mind you, is 680p. My technology is 4K and full color, and it's a completely different application and a different level of sensitivity. It's a more advanced system of scanning space. I took a 14-inch conventional telescope and converted it into a 900-millimeter f2 lens. And in doing so, I was able to scan space at 900 millimeters at f2. If you're familiar with camera technology, it's a lens that's wide open, and it was able to clearly detect and record these objects as they flew by into my frame of perspective.
Okay, so you've been serving in an advisory capacity. You give lots of good advice. You monitor. You research. But you didn't have a chance to catch the specific congressional testimony. Why now, do you think?
I believe they believe that the human population is ready for it. Look at all the movies that came out, all the aliens and all the things that are presented. It was indeed indoctrinating us for things to come.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, if one were to go with that theory, though, there's been a pretty ample supply of films for years. I do think that this betrays the government position that some people presume that says that the reason why they retain this information is because they don't think we're able to handle it. We're going to freak out as a public.
Exactly.
I think there's been sort of a collective yawn about it. I don't see anybody building new churches or doing anything, shifting their values, or everybody just kind of picks up and goes right back to work.
They've been indoctrinated to it. In fact, the sci-fi films make it almost impossible to believe.
Yeah, which sci-fi film do you think gets it closest?
The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing.
Oh, really?
That's interesting. Yes, that's one possibility. But I don't watch that many movies that are associated to UFOs, and in fact, there aren't that many movies that do present that particular level of information. So
what do you think, based on what you know, what is not being said that the public needs to know the most about Wilbur Allen?
I believe what's not being said is that these objects are here, and they've established presence in our airspace. The interesting element associated to this is that these objects exist in extreme invisibility, and humans can't see them.
So they really can be just hovering silently behind their cloaking devices.
Absolutely.
Okay. How does this tie into things like cattle mutilations?
I believe that they're looking for possible genetics, possible things that could be issues associated to their race, and looking for something that could replace whatever issue it is they have and make their systems better.
Okay. It seems like the whole crop circle thing has been largely debunked, but on the presumption that at least some of them are true, why the crop circles?
The ones that are true are the ones that are precise. The more precise crop circles are obviously done by advanced intelligence, in which they were able to establish uniform consistency in their design applications.
Okay. So what would they do with it?
Unknown.
Okay. So
maybe it's a message to us. It could be a lot of things, but at this juncture of the game, it is completely unknown.
So it could just be intergalactic graffiti.
Absolutely.
It could be pointing toward where water is or something like that. I mean, I don't know what the resource is that they want. And so that at one glance, they'd be able to know even the more novel of these
they did
craft.
do some research on crop circles, and they determined that the circle was generated by a field of some sort because the plant itself was bent specifically and uniformly in a location in which it would be physically impossible.
The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.